So when I got back to Canada, I was in grade 5 at the time, and this is a couple years later, but I told my friends what I had seen about this incredible world that existed, how my Qualicum friends were right at the center of this, and how it was being destroyed. They'd also heard about problems with our environment. This was during the 80s, so we'd heard a lot in the media about the ozone layer and about air pollution and water pollution, but we didn't really know very much. And so we thought, well, let's start by getting ourselves educated. And we decided to form a club. We called ourselves ECHO, the Environmental Children's Organization. And that's where we started. We just started having meetings, started talking to teachers, parents, friends of parents, anybody who knew anything about environmental problems. And we started doing little projects. We started with things like beach cleanups. We started learning about local NGOs that were doing neat advocacy work in surrounding watersheds. We started publishing a small newsletter with the help of the Environmental Youth Alliance, a newsletter for other kids with the information we were learning. And we had a great time. It was incredibly educational at the same time as being really, really fun. In about 1991, after a few years of just starting to get involved like this, I heard about a huge meeting that was going to take place in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. This was going to be a UN conference, the United Nations Earth Summit, and this was going to be the largest gathering of heads of state ever held. They were going to talk about issues of environment and development. And the whole buzz about this conference was that it was really going to set the tone for the rest of the 20th century. It was really going to be the make or break meeting to deal with our environmental health in the future. So we heard about this conference and we thought, well, there's going to be all these old men sitting around talking about our future. Who is going to remind them of why they are really there and who their decisions are actually going to really affect? Well, we should go. Yeah, great idea. ECHO should go to represent the future generations and the people who are ultimately affected. Great idea. Well, I told my parents this, and they said, "You're crazy? You guys are just little kids. I mean, there's going to be 30,000 people there. No, this is crazy." And even though well, my dad especially said this to me, we just thought that this was a really worthwhile idea to at least start to explore it. We started just talking about this idea to anybody who would give us their ear, parents, teachers, friends, parents, and lo and behold, people started donating money to our cause. Well, that kind of freaked us out because then we realized, holy cow, this might actually happen. So at that point, my mom got involved. We had an incredible amount of support from the Environmental Youth Alliance, the EYA, and they instructed us on how you hold a fundraiser, how you give speeches, how do you raise money, how do you produce event plans or agendas with little blank checks tucked inside of them to help people along. How do you make a pitch for money? All of these things. And eventually, from our community, we ended up raising enough money to send 5 of us to go to the Earth Summit. Next. So here we are in Brazil. This is ECHO, and you can see Rafi is at the center of this. He became a really big supporter of ours. He lives not too far away. He lived not too far away from us in Vancouver, and he actually ended up going down to Brazil with us as a chaperone. So we get to this conference. Now what? There were over 30,000 people there. We were 12 and 13 years old at the time, and where do you start? Well, we had registered as an NGO at the Global Forum, which was the realm where all the NGOs were put. And even though we didn't have nonprofit status or anything, I mean, we were just a kids club, but we'd registered, and it gave us a booth. So every day we would go to the booth, and all day we would just pass out these pamphlets that we'd made with a Xerox copier at home, and we had these little brooches that we made for fundraising, and most of all, we talked to people. The international media was there. There were hundreds of people from all over the world milling around. We spoke 4 different languages between the 5 of us, and so we were able to talk to a whole diversity of different people. And because we were so young, instead of this being a hindrance, this was a point of interest, and people started coming to our booth curious about why these kids were here at this very grown-up meeting. And people started inviting us to their little events that were scattered all over the conference. And we started getting our message out. We started getting very good at delivering 5-minute speeches on why we were there. And after 2 weeks of this kind of very hard work, we received a phone call from the UN. We were actually about to leave the city. We'd done our work, we'd been there for 2 weeks, we'd given a lot of little speeches, we'd never actually spoken to the world leaders, and here we were about to leave, and finally we got a call from the UN. They said, well, if you want to get your message out to the heads of state, you have an hour, you could get down here and you could speak for 5 minutes. So we said, okay, forget about the airplane. We are going to the UN. This is why we came here. Jumped into a cab, this crazy Brazilian taxi swerving through the traffic, and we're sitting in the back seat scribbling out some kind of a speech and kind of compiling all of our messages into one speech. Got into Rio Centro, which is where the conference was being held, raced through all the security, which was absolutely insane, all these military with huge machine guns, raced up to the plenary session and up to the front, didn't have time to get nervous, thank goodness, and I was able to give a 5-minute speech. So what did I tell them? Well, I told them that I was 12. I told them that I was scared about what was happening, not only to the future, but what I was already seeing in my home in British Columbia, what I'd seen in the Amazon. And I told them that before their duties as politicians, as business people, as professionals, their first duty was as parents and as people who had to act with their children's best interests. And that was their first responsibility in these meetings, and that's what they had to think about when they made their decisions. And most people in that audience, I think, were probably even grandparents. So by the time I finished speaking, people were crying. People were standing, people were crying. Even the security guard was crying. And it was this incredible feeling because we had actually achieved this idea that we'd set out to do. And I tell this story now, it's almost separate from me 14 years later, because it shows the power of an idea and the receptiveness that people have when we talk about the fundamental, important things of life. So I think I'll stop my slides there, actually. But that's my slides from Rio. But you guys aren't off the hook yet. I have more to say. So it's been 14 years since this big, huge conference that was supposed to change the world. What has happened since? Well, it turned out that 1992, which was supposed to be this turnaround year when everybody was supposed to really dig in and make a shift in what was happening in our ecology, it turned out that this year was actually kind of the culmination of interest in the environment. And as you know, the 90s were not about sustainability. It was actually pretty much the opposite. But there's been a lot more conferences during that time. And since Rio, I've been to many conferences. I've been to many talks. I've been to Rio+5. I went to the Kyoto conference in 1997. I went to prep comms for the Rio Plus 10. I went to Rio Plus 10 in Johannesburg. And the years have gone by, and it seems like the global situation hasn't gotten better, and I've gotten older, and I've slowly realized that real change does not happen at these big international conferences. Real change does not come out of these declarations. It doesn't come from those top political leaders. The only way that real change happens is from individuals, groups of individuals who decide to take responsibility for their own communities. It only happens out of gatherings like this, even smaller meetings, and I think you guys will break down later today. It takes people taking on ownership, takes people saying, well, nobody else is going to do this, so I guess we have to think of a strategy. And that's how solutions are found. On this grassroots level, amazing things are happening all over the planet. We can make all kinds of international agreements, but it's only by looking at ourselves and what we can do in our own homes that anything actually happens. And that's how we actually make a real contribution to what's happening on a global level. And that's what I hope that this weekend is all about, which is this individual agreement. Okay, let's do something about it. After 14 years of pushing for environmental reform, I'm not quite jaded, but I'm no longer prioritizing my interest in speaking to world leaders, because I don't think that's where it's going to come from. We have to be the ones to change our lives and our priorities, and I believe then our politicians will follow.